All right, hello everyone. This is Michael Bean from Forio, and today we're going to be covering the topic of creating scenario planning simulations with Forio Epicenter. And just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to start by talking about, first off, what is Epicenter? What is the Epicenter platform and what does it do? Then we're going to look at a couple completed scenario planning simulations examples. So you can see what a finished simulation would look like and get a sense for what scenario planning simulations do and how they're used and why you would maybe want to use them in some cases. And then from there, what we're going to do is build a scenario planning simulation together. And we're going to start by building a model. For today, we're going to use Excel for building our model because I think that's the most accessible tool for building models. But there are other tools that you can use as well for building simulations. Then we're going to create a basic interface. And of course, it's going to be basic because we have an hour together today. So we're going to do a very quick interface, but you'll get a sense for how they get put together. And you'll also see what you can do using some of the drag and drop tools that are available in Epicenter to create scenario planning interfaces. We're going to create some accounts so that you can see how login works for these simulations and then take a look at some additional reports. And as I said, at the end of the webinar, we'll leave some time for questions if any of you have any. All right, so starting off, what is Forio Epicenter? Forio Epicenter is a platform for authoring and hosting simulations. So it's a tool both when you start, like we are today, building a simulation, you can use it to upload your model and create an interface and create accounts and things like that. But once it's running, you can actually use it for hosting so that you can have people who potentially maybe subscribe to your simulation and gain access to it that way. And share access to it over time. And interestingly, with scenario planning simulations, a lot of our customers who use Forio Epicenter actually resell basically their intellectual property through a scenario planning simulations and use that subscription mechanism for providing that. There's a number of small companies, so startups actually, who've started their business using Forio Epicenter. In addition to building simulations, Epicenter can support other kinds of mathematical equations and analyses, like statistical analyses, for example, machine learning, optimization, and other kinds of analytical models online. And to give you a little bit of a sense for that, here are some of the languages that are supported in Epicenter. And as I said, for today, we're going to be using Excel as our main programming language, but I know I saw on the list for today, we have several people who are system dynamics simulation modelers. And so at the top here, if you're familiar with that, these are the commercial system dynamic simulation languages that Epicenter supports. And in addition, we support things like Python, R, Julia, Java. Those are all technical computing languages that can be used for building models of various kinds, including scenario planning models. And then through various packages that are supported in Python specifically, but also R, I suppose, you can support optimizations like Gurobi or Cplex and AI frameworks and libraries like TensorFlow and Theano. So that's just a little bit of a background on the platform. I'm going to get more into it as we actually build the simulation. But from here, what I thought we could do is take a look at some examples of completed scenario planning simulations. So here is an example of a simulation that was developed a couple years ago, and it was intended to help people who are in Vietnam, people who are working as within hospitals, hospital administrators, and also city administrators to think about how to deal with AIDS and HIV. And it's interesting to think about like how Epicenter is supporting that from the perspective of hosting it. Originally what happened is the modeler, the author of the model that did this nice model around AIDS and HIV in Vietnam, went out to Haiphong and delivered the simulation by showing the modeling interface, and kind of equivalent to showing an Excel model or something like that. And then what would happen is these the people who were implementing policies in Haiphong asked questions, and those questions were translated then into English, and then he would implement them in the model and show results, and then talk about the results and translate them back. And you can see that's sort of a cumbersome process, and it slowed down the ability to do analyses and also kind of comprehend these analyses and things like that. So what happened is this simulation got converted into Epicenter, where it not only it allowed the city officials to interact directly with the model, but also appeared in Vietnamese, which was obviously much more accessible for that audience. Today we'll use it in English here, and I'm just going to sign in. And I wanted to start with this simulation because this is kind of closest in terms of design. We won't do it quite as sophisticated as this, but closest to design to what we're going to do for our example today. So here we can see we chose a region. So we chose a specific region called Haiphong here on the eastern part of Vietnam. And we're getting a little bit of background information. These are the initial values that are used to tune the model to represent Haiphong in this case. And then we start the simulation and we have a base case. And the base case is the initial run without any changes to assumptions about what might be happening in the future. So here you can see the initial runs here, and I can expand the graph and see what it looks like with that base case here. And the purpose of this really is to look at different policies and experiment with what might the outcomes be in the terms of, for example, the number of new cases if I change some policies now. So let me go ahead and try that. I'm going to do target-based policies right now. And I don't know a lot about this topic, so this isn't a sim that I built, but I'm going to kind of just do something here to illustrate. And here what I've done is increased my prevention targets. So if you think about disease prevention or managing diseases, you can do things that prevent the disease from ever occurring, or if the disease has occurred, you can do treatment. So I'm just kind of upping all the prevention targets to see what happens here. And I'm going to name that my prevention scenario. So I'll go ahead and run that out. And then what it does is it creates a new line, in this case, kind of a dark green line, I suppose, that shows, yes, that prevention strategy actually reduced the number of HIV cases. And then over here, I can see, relative to other programs here, what happened. And here, one of the things I did, a prevention strategy is to increase methadone programs, for example. So you can see I doubled that, and that resulted in some good outcomes. And I can also try other strategies. I can go in here and, for example, put in, what if I did additional treatment? So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to double everything here and call this my treatment scenario and simulate it. And so now I have a third scenario in here. And it's sort of interesting to see that the prevention and treatment scenarios are actually very close together. You can see they kind of have a similar outcome, but the way that they arrive at it is different, right? So, and there's maybe differences in costs and things like that. And it's not just this dashboard that we can look at. We can also look at detailed reports that are available. And there's even sort of a performance review where we can compare the differences in cases, the differences in costs of implementing the programs, et cetera. Finally, there's a lot more to this, but it's not all about the sim today, so I just want to show you a little bit about how it works, but we can also manage the scenarios. So I just created these two scenarios, the prevention and treatment scenario. And then if I wanted to, if I didn't like one of those, I could delete it. And if I go back to my outcomes report now, you'll see that prevention scenario is no longer available. It's been deleted from the run. If I log out and log back in, I'll see these scenarios going from the future. Yeah, so that's the basic idea. Okay, there are other topics that can get covered with this. This is an example of a simulation that MIT did around how alternative fuel vehicles like, say electric cars or cars that run on hydrogen or something like that might work in the future. And similarly to the one we just saw, we have this ability to kind of set up initial conditions. Here we can kind of fine tune the initial conditions any way we like. And then what we do is get output here in terms of sales over time, and we have a whole bunch of things that we can change about, in this case, tax incentives and so forth, and OEM strategies and fuels. And then, once we've decided what we want to do, we can simulate to the end, and the simulation runs out, and then we can get these kind of detailed views of what's happening over time. And with what I just put in, it looks like traditional gas-powered vehicles or non-traditional vehicles or alternative fuel vehicles outsell gas-powered vehicles around 2041, something like that, according to this run. And I can go and look at different reports and things like that. So that's another type of scenario planning simulation. What's similar between the first one and this one is that what we're doing is we're setting a set of initial conditions, what are assumptions about the scenarios that we want to run, and then simulating it into the future and looking at outcomes and then experimenting with new policies and things like that. The last one I wanted to share with you today is sort of a final example of scenario planning, is a new one that is just been developed by the Centers for Disease Control for looking at healthcare policies that can improve morbidity and mortality in the United States. And it's going to be publicly released very soon. It's just about to be released here. I set up a new account for today because I kind of want to show you a little bit of how this works. This is interesting because it actually supports many different models. So one of the things it does, I think it has 7 or 8 different models that it can select from, and it has some intelligence in it that what it does is it looks at what your settings are for your city or your region or whatever, and then kind of builds it against that to kind of recommend a model to be used. That's kind of how it starts off here. For today, what I'm gonna do is just use all the national averages, but what I could do instead is, pick a location. Like right today, Raymond and I are here in San Francisco, and if we could put in information about the size of San Francisco, population density, and so forth, put all these data in, and then what it would do is recommend a model. So if I'm going to input today, I'll just use all the national averages here. I'll click on that I've completed my demographic profile, and then what you can see is based on the profile I entered, it recommends a model to use for running today. So that's sort of interesting. And you can see large city, urban area, various kinds of cities, small cities, and so forth. Not surprisingly, because I use the national average for everything, it shows the national model as the model to use. So anyway, I guess it did a good job at that. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and save my initial profile options, and it's gonna load the model. And it's sort of a nice website here too, and you can see too that this is using the CDC's Gov site, not the Forio website, for running this all out, which is good. There's a quick tour information that's available that kind of outlines how the simulation works. I'm not going to go through this today, but these are things that are available. And this shows kind of what a finished, a highly polished kind of what we call high production value simulation looks like in terms of running it all out and things like that. So I can go to my scenarios. I currently don't have any scenarios because I just created an account, but the first thing I might do here is create a new scenario. And the idea is that I can, okay, so right now what it's doing is taking me through the sort of how to run a scenario and things like that. It's taking me through a tutorial, kind of introduce how all that works. And sort of explaining it. But now that I already know how it works, I'm just going to go through and run it together. But what I might do is experiment with different policies to see how those might work out over time. So let me try out a couple things here, and let's work on physical activity for my first scenario. And what I'm going to do is focus on things that maybe are more targeted to young people or to the youth. And what we have here are initial intervention values, and where we're starting in 2018. And what I want to do is ramp up over the next 5 years, so from 2018 to 2023. And I want to get higher values in here. So let me just dial this up, and I can do it kind of 2 ways. I can do it manually here. Let me use my mouse. There we go. And dial it up this way, or I can do it by typing in numbers here too. So if I want to just type in a number here, I can do something like that to enter that. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on Run Scenario, and I can name this. I'm going to call this Youth Physical Activity, and I'll save it, and then create a new result here. Okay, and so here's my outcome, and you can see it had very little impact on morbidity and mortality, going all the way out, in this case, to 2060, right? But I can go and look at deaths, for example. A place I should probably look, given this type of scenario that I just created, is to see what kind of impact it would have on youth and obesity, for example. And it looks like it had a small impact. And it maybe has some impact, no impact on nutrition, and it had sort of a direct impact on physical activity, not surprisingly, since what I did in that case was to focus on physical activity. And there's a bunch of other things here too. I can look at the tables, I can copy the data into Excel and things like that to do further analyses. And the real purpose of this is not to do such simple scenarios, but instead to kind of combine different kinds of interventions together and to look at what would be good outcomes for a particular community. So this is used by people who, kind of like the first example, actually, it's looking at people who want to look at policies that they could be doing in a city or in a state or nationwide, and sort of look at what kinds of impacts can we expect in terms of reducing the diseases and reducing morbidity over time, or mortality, pardon me, over time. So I think that's enough just to kind of introduce a little bit. There's a lot more here. This one, like I said, is going to be out very soon if you're interested in this particular model. But I just want to give you kind of a preview of it for today. Let's go back to our deck for a minute and take a look more at how these things get built. And there's really 2 approaches that we see of for people who are using Forio Epicenter building these kinds of models. The first one This isn't me. This is not a picture of me, but it could be me. You know, over the last couple of days as I've been prepping this webinar, which is, and it could be you as well, where you're sort of working on your own and developing an interface to a simulation like the examples I just shared, but you don't have sort of a team behind you. So you may be an individual modeler who has an idea for something that you want to cover and you want to build this out, but there's no UI designer or whatever. And you can use Epicenter in this mode. And this is really what we're going to be focusing on today, because this is the easiest way to build models in Epicenter. But there's another approach as well, which is kind of closer to the 3 examples I shared, especially the CDC example, which is you have a team of people who are producing what we think of as high production value simulations. So in this case, you would have a UI designer who's coming up with a design and creating something on her or his own. You'd have a modeler of some sort who's working in Excel or maybe Python or PowerSim or VenSim or what have you, and building a model. Web developers who are implementing the UI design that came from the designer. You would often have a subject matter expert too. It's not on this list, but there'd be a subject matter expert who would be advising the group on what the simulation should do. Often if you're releasing it to, in the case of the CDC example, maybe tens or hundreds of thousands of people, you want to test it in QA to make sure it works on different devices and it works in different browsers, et cetera. And then because you have all these people working together, you need a project manager. So this is also can be supported in Epicenter, and we have lots of people who are working this way. And there's tools for supporting teams who are development teams for producing these high production value simulations. And the way that we support both of those audiences is through a set of interface technologies. And if you start at the top of the stack, we have the simplest things that are used by individuals to build things without a full team. And those are the interface templates, and that's what we're going to be using today. But when you start to have people who are, say, specialists in web design and web development, then they would use tools like Flow.js and Epicenter.js for building it. And those are libraries that can access the APIs that Forio, the Epicenter, provides for building this out. So my point is that Epicenter is a very rich platform, and it has a lot of sophistication, but it has a nice entry point at the kind of top of the stack to make it relatively easy to build simulations. So from here, what I'd like to do is get started on actually building out the simulation. And the place that we start with this is a model. And what I was thinking about today was, as an example, is the Tesla Cybertruck. I was just trying to think of something to do for some, and I don't have a lot of great data, by the way, on Cybertruck. So whatever forecasts we do with our model is not going to be realistic. It's just an attempt to build a model that we can work through and things like that. But I think it's kind of an interesting topic, and there's been a lot of things in the news over the last few months here around, what might happen with the Cybertruck in the future. This is an article from Forbes that talks about how, the Cybertruck could bring in $4.5 billion in revenue for Tesla by 2025, and it talks about sales and things like that. So just, that's the topic that we're going to use for today. And I really wanted to start with a blank model because I really wanted to show you kind of how a model comes together. And so what I have here is just a blank Excel spreadsheet. This is what we're going to be using for our model today, and go through that and build it. And so the first thing we want to do for our scenario model is map out time and kind of talk about what time we want this to run. I'm going to start my model in 2020. And then I just want it to go forward a few years here. So I'm going to do, I don't know, to 2026, let's say, or maybe 2027. I'm not quite sure. Something like that. So we're going to go a few years out into the future. And then what I want to do is start thinking about, like, what would I do in order to map out what the opportunity is for, Tesla over time. I'm going to do market size here. I'm assuming that there are 10 million customers for the Tesla, and that, or for this Cybertruck, and then maybe they grow by a little bit. Maybe they grow by 3% per year. So I'll go ahead and put that in. And then what I want to do is think about what's the installed base, or what will the installed base be for these vehicles. And what I really want to do with that is maybe start with an initial installed base. And this may be one of the things that the user of this changes as they're running the simulation. So what they could do is say, I want to have, I don't think that the initial installed base is going to be something. I think it's going to be higher or lower or what have you. But I'm going to go ahead and put that in. I'm assuming it's 1 million. I should probably do some formatting here so I can see what's going on. It's hard to tell where my thing. So that's 1 million. Okay, that's good. And so my value at the beginning of the simulation for the installed base is going to be equal to the initial installed base. And I'm going to anchor that so it doesn't change over time. And you can do that with dollar signs if you're familiar with Excel. And so now this is just referencing this cell, right? Okay, from there, what I want to do is think about what the potential customers are for the Cybertruck. And in general, this potential customers are simply going to be the market size minus the number in the installed base. So that's the number of remaining or potential customers over time. And one of the things I want to use is a variable called potential customer fraction. And that's just going to be equal to the potential customers divided by the market size. And this one should be formatted a little bit differently. This should be formatted like this will be easier to see. So that's the fraction over time. So right now it's at 90%, but our assumption is as the installed base grows, it's going to decline over time. And then, the money calculation here is really around new sales. That's kind of what we're trying to get at. And, what we're doing is kind of building a simple diffusion model in Excel. That's kind of my attempt right now. And the way we would typically do that is we'd say that, somebody's driving around a new Tesla Cybertruck and your neighbor has one, you see it and you think, oh, this is great. And so maybe a year or two later, you buy one. And so it's kind of growing by word of mouth because you discover how good these cars are, something like that. That's kind of the basic model that we're building here. So I'm going to say there's an installed base that talks to a certain number of people over time, but some of the people they talk to are going to be already Cybertruck owners. So at the beginning, it's going to be very few, but as the simulation progresses, there's going to be it's going to be more. So we'll put in it's actually new sales times the potential customer fraction there that's going to be driving that over time. And then there's some rate at which they're going to there's some market effectiveness rate that they need as well here too. So let me go ahead and put that in. I want to have a market effectiveness. This is like how, or marketing effectiveness is probably a better term here, marketing effectiveness. This is how effective is marketing over time for selling it. And I'm going to just put that at 1 initially here. And then what I want to do with that is multiply that times that value. And that's something that's going to maybe change the number of new sales over time. Okay, then I want to think about repeat sales. And for repeat sales, what I want to do is, think about like how often will people repurchase? So I say years to repurchase a car or a Cybertruck. I'll say maybe every 5 years. I don't know, maybe longer, but we'll leave it at 5 years from now. So then repeat sales is simply going to be equal to the installed base divided by this years to repurchase. And this needs to be anchored as well so it doesn't change over time. I should check this one. Yeah, B17 also needs to be anchored up here. So let's do that. Okay, so now we've got those two together and we're getting close to the end. So now let's just do total sales down here. And for total sales, it's going to be equal to new sales plus repeat sales. And I had kind of an idea that I thought would be fun is to, in scenario planning, a lot of times you want to think about, I've been talking with a client recently about black swan events. And there's a person a few years ago who wrote about black swan. You might have heard of that before, but it's basically this idea that things kind of come out of the blue that affect outcomes in the future. And not everything has to be a black swan event, but there could be things that sort of affect things in the future. I was thinking, well, what if we had a new competitor that was very successful and we could have this new competitor enter over time? And the idea would be that we would have a year where we introduce a new competitor. Let me do that here. And I'm going to, for right now, I'll put in 2023, I think. Okay, so I don't want it formatted that way. I want it to look plainer. There we go. All right, there we go. So 2023 is when my new competitor is going to be coming in. First up, let me just copy these across here so we get this set up a little better. So there's some values here. And then for the installed base, what we want it to be equal to is the installed base plus the number of new sales each year. So that's where that comes from. And that should grow over time as well. And there you can see the pattern already with the potential customer fraction shrinking over time and sort of total sales changing over time as well. So we're starting to get a working model together here. But lastly, what I want to do is I want to look at when there's a new competitor. And what I'm going to do is just have a Boolean or a 0 or 1 here. I'll say equal if this year, which is the current year, is greater than or equal to the year to introduce a competitor, then I want this to be a 1 or a 0. And so what you can see here is it's starting off at 0. And then as I proceed, oh, I didn't do it right. That's good. That's common, right? With modeling, or at least most people make mistakes at the beginning. You have to correct them. Okay, so this looks better. So now in 2023, the new competitor enters, right? And then what we can do here is say that new sales is going to be affected by that new competitor. And what we'll do is we'll say times 1 minus, and we'll just say 20% times this Boolean here is what's going to affect that. So what that'll do is reduce the new sales by 20% when the new competitor comes in. And you can see initially it's having no effect. Here we see, let's just notice this. So we had 362 new sales at the end here. And then now as I drag this across, that is going to have an impact on new sales over time. So, and if I put a very high number in here, then we'll see that that going down. So I think we said, let's just check this out. If we did in 2021, we have that new one come in, it should be lower than 1.5 million. Let's just make sure I did that correctly. And it went down. Okay, so good. So we have that working, and we'll just use this arbitrarily high number as marking it as something where the competitor is not introduced. That's enough. That's enough of a model. That's maybe a little bit more than we needed, but we've got our model together here. The last step we have to do in order to import this into Forio Epicenter is to use named ranges. Now, we don't necessarily have to name ranges in here for everything, but it's a lot easier to refer to things if we do that. We only actually need a couple of named ranges. We need time, and actually we need another thing here called step, which says when to start the model. We want it to start at 0 here. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this in at 0. But what I want to do then to create the ranges here is in Excel, you can use this thing called insert name create. So insert name create. This is in the Mac version of Excel, and it's similar but not identical in Windows. And then I go use the left column here. And what that does is, if you haven't done this before, is it creates a range that's named after the things in the left. So here we can see up here, this is called time now. So these sets of cells are called time. And new sales here is this one, and it's called new underscore sales. You can see that up here. And I also want to do it with these down here, but I just want to have individual cells named. So I'm going to go again, insert name create. And I'm going to use the left column for the names. And I do that. And now you can see that this cell is called year to introduce new competitor. And this cell is called marketing effectiveness, and so on. Okay, so that's our whole model, and it's everything we need to do to get this imported. So I'm going to go ahead and save it here. And now I'm going to finally go over to Forio Epicenter and go to my Sims account and create a new project. So I'm starting a new project from scratch. I'm going to call this my Tesla Cybertruck. It looks like okay. Cybertruck. Okay. Sales forecaster. That's kind of what I'm doing. Or did I spell that right? I did. It's just a weird name. Okay. Tesla Cybertruck Sales Forecaster is the name of it. And I click on it. I click on that, and when I do that, what you can see is it creates a project ID that is URL friendly. So it replaces the spaces with the dashes, and it puts everything in lowercase. And so that creates the URL that we're going to have available for the simulation later on. And notice that right now it's, as I said, Epicenter is a hosting platform. So it's hosting it here, but it can also be hosted in other places. You can see like the CDC did that here. They don't have it directly hosted on, it's not the Forio URL here, it's the CDC URL for hosting this. Okay, so there we go. And I have 3 levels of access that I can provide for this simulation. I can do public, which means anyone in the world can run it. There's no, they don't get to see the model, but they'll have access to the interface that we're creating. I can have private, where only I as the developer have access to it. No one else in the world can see it, only the authors can see it. And this is useful for when you're creating something new and you're not yet ready for launching it. And then lastly, probably the most common one is authenticated. And authenticated means it requires end users who want to use your scenario planning simulation to log in. And these two, you can use, there's a free version of Epicenter where you can use the public and private, but for authenticated, you need a pay account to access that authenticated option. So I'm gonna go ahead and create the project. And we have our new project here called Tesla Cybertruck Sales Forecaster. And it has a URL, which I can click on, but it's not very interesting yet. It just has this robot saying the page is not available because, of course, we haven't put any content in there yet. And what we have is folders where we need to add content in order to build the simulation. Here you can see a model folder, and right now it says file not found, so there's no models in our model folder. And we can correct that right now. What I'm going to do is go to my Finder, and here you can see This is the model at 7:27 a.m. Right now it's 7:30 a.m. in San Francisco. So that's the model we created 3 minutes ago. I'm gonna drag this in here like this, and it uploads it. And so now we do have a model that's been uploaded, and that's all we need for today for what we're doing. And you can upload other models this way too. You can upload your VenSim or Python models in the same manner. And there's actually other ways too of integrating this with your desktop, so you don't even have, it'll kind of auto sync, but we're not gonna get into that today. And then for our interface right now, you can see we have a little bit of interface folders set up. We have some things that are private and public and things for facilitators, but there's nothing in them. If I open up the private folder, for example, you can see no files found in here. And these are basic file structures that we have available just to control access to the simulations if we need it. So now that we have our model uploaded, what we need to do is create an interface. And as I said, what I'm going to do for today is focus on the top of the stack. I'm not going to do these fancier things, but I'm going to just use this interface templates for creating this simulation. So let me go ahead and do that. And the way I do that is use the interface builder. I click into it, and you have to upload a model before using interface builder. And the reason for that is what interface builder does is it analyzes your model and then makes recommendations about the type of interface to build, and also makes recommendations in terms of the pages, the starting pages that you want to have available for your interface. So you always have to upload the model first. Here I can see 4 recommendations that it's making based on the model that I just uploaded. It says, well, you could build turn-by-turn based simulation. You could maybe, I think it would be a bit of a stretch, but you could maybe build a multiplayer game using this where multiple people log in and they make decisions together. You can do a run comparison, and this is the one we want today, which is a scenario planning simulation. It's called run comparison, but it really means doing the scenario planning where you're comparing one run to another. And then you can also do a calculator. So we're going to do this one today for the run comparison. I'll click into it. And what it's doing is it sets up an interface that it thinks makes sense for this style of simulation. And you might remember back at the AIDS and HIV one, I clicked through this manage thing, and it had this little run manager. And what you can see here is it also set up a run manager for us. It doesn't have anything in it yet, but it's kind of doing things that say, this is sensible for a scenario planning simulation. Okay, so let's go ahead and name some things here and just create a header and footer. I'm gonna call this my, let's see here. I'm gonna call this my Tesla Cybertruck sales forecaster. It may be nice to have a logo in here, and prior to starting this, I found a Cybertruck icon that I can use. So I've got that, and I'm gonna go ahead and put that in place here. So there you can see the picture of the Cybertruck. I'll go ahead and do that, and now I'm gonna select that as the icon for this. I could put a copyright notice down here. I could also link to other things if I want. But now if I go back to the introduction, you can see there's my car. Oh, I cut it off a little bit. Anyway, no, I didn't. That's just the look of, that's the look of the Cybertruck. I forgot they're very sharp-edged vehicles. Anyway, so we got Tesla Cybertruck sales forecaster. And then I can, put some welcome text in, welcome, do the scenario planning tool or whatever. And then I can put some other text in here. I also set up just some text that we could use for today to kind of move this along. So here's some text I found online that I thought would be good here. So there's our little explanation. And then for intro 2, we can also add media. You can have different kinds of media, like an image. You can have an image map and things like that. I can also put a video in here. And earlier I found a YouTube. It doesn't have to be YouTube, by the way. It can be in other sources, but YouTube works. So there's my video for that. And that's starting to look a little bit like a nice intro page for that. One thing that's worth noting is that these are not the only pages that you can have, right? So you can add pages here, and you can see, like for example, there's a lot of different styles of pages for the intro that I could have used. And I can select these, and I can even customize them. I can only create my own templates if I want to, but I'm just going to use the default one right now. And what this tries to do is make some nice assumptions about what the defaults should be. I also have a dashboard here that it's recommending, but in this case, I don't actually like the dashboard that it's choosing for me, because I want to actually show some different reports. I want to show a fuller range of things that the tool can do. So in this case, I am going to add a page, and the style of thing I'm going to add here is a run comparison template. And I'll show a little bit more about what run comparison templates do as we go through it, but basically we want to be able to compare one scenario to another, one run to another in the simulation. And this one has the most features in it, so I'm going to go ahead and name this my new dashboard. There's my new dashboard. I'm going to go ahead and put that in. And then what I'm going to do is go to navigation settings and change my dashboard now to new dashboard. There's the one I just created. And so now that's going to be linked in the interface. All right, so I've got that. I can go ahead and close that. And now I can see that the dashboard references the new dashboard, and the old dashboard is down here, which I'm just going to delete. I don't need that anymore. Okay, so now I've got my new dashboard in here, and I want to put some things into it. So I want to show some behavior from my Excel model that I did a moment ago. A good thing to start with may be total sales. That's probably a good place for the big graph. So I'm going to do a line chart of total sales, and I'll name this total sales here. And then I choose the y-axis, and notice what it's doing now is it's doing something we call model introspection. So it's able to look inside of the Excel model based on those range names that I created, and then identify variables that I could use for plotting. And here I can see, I can see all of them here. It's not a very big list because we didn't build a very big model, but if I had a bigger list, I could look it up by typing part of the word here, but I want to plot total sales. And notice what it's doing right away is it's plotting out total sales over time based on the model that I created for the baseline, which is the default assumptions that went into the model. I can also do other kinds of graphs, like I might want to do bar charts, and these are kind of similar to what we had created with the HIV sim at the beginning here, where I maybe want to do, let's say, how potential customers might be changing. So this will be my potential customers bar graph, and there's the potential customers line, and that's going to be starting off there. And I can do another one that is, maybe this is the installed base. So I'll do that, and there's my installed base, and that's going to have another line here. And at the beginning, it's not very interesting because there's only one run associated with it. It'll be more interesting later on. And then lastly, what I might want to have is a table that shows results from my simulation. I can build one by one, and there's a little table that's down here that's available in the particular template I selected. So here, what I want to do is select what I want to have on it, and maybe total sales makes sense. And then you can see here, here's the total sales numbers, but these are kind of overly precise, right? Like that doesn't look very good. So what I can do is I can format that. I can type in my own formatting if I want to up here, but I also have some default ones which are good. So here's the 1,000 separation that looks reasonable for this, for these numbers here. You can see kind of how they're changing over time. Okay, so that's my dashboard. That looks pretty good. The next thing I need to do is add some decisions. Okay, so decisions can come, usually for a scenario planning sim would come from this set of things, from these initial conditions, because you set these, and then, if I change these values, they'll influence the rest of the results in the model that I created, right? So that's kind of how they work. So a good one that I could control here would be marketing effectiveness. And I know, because I built some sales models like this in the past, I kind of know that the reasonable range for marketing effectiveness is from like 0.8 to 1.5. So I know that. And there's some things we can do to help the user make reasonable decisions about that. And one of them might be, for that marketing effectiveness variable, is to limit it. And a good way to limit it is to use the slider. So I'm going to put in marketing effectiveness here. And I'm going to put in my variable of marketing effectiveness. There it is. And I can see it here. The format for it, I'm going to use a percentage format. And I'm going to say the minimum is 0.8, the maximum is 1.5, so 150%, and the increment is going to be 0.1. So that's going to be enough to kind of get that to work the way I want here. And then what I want to do is put in, let's see, what else do I have? I have years to repurchase. Yeah, let's do that one. Okay, so we'll do years to repurchase as an input. I'll just put years to repurchase here. So I might say, actually people don't buy every 5 years, they buy every 10 years or every 3 years or what have you. So I'm going to change that, and I can put that in. And notice it's picking up the value from the model of 5. So it knows that it's the 5 there, and I can format that as well. I'll just use that comma separator. Okay, then lastly, what I want to do is introduce my black swan event, right? And again, if I put in 2023 here, that means the competitor comes in play in 2023. And if I leave it at 77.7, then they never come into effect. So, and what I want to do is make it less abstract and make it easier for the user to do that. And a good way to handle that is with a drop-down menu. So let's go ahead and select drop-down menu here, and we'll call this, what do we call it? It's called years to introduce, did I say years? Year to introduce new competitors. So new competitor introduction year is what I call it. New competitor introduction year, and that's going to be a drop down. The variable I want to use is year to introduce new competitor, And I don't really want to have all the years here. I probably want to have, I don't want to introduce a competitor right away, and I don't want to introduce a competitor at the end. I'm going to say 2022 to 2024 is the right range there. So I'll do 2022 here, and the value for that will be 2022. Then I'll do 2023, and the value for that will be 2023. I'll add an option 2024, which will be 2024. And then I want to add a last option here, which is never. I never want to have the competitor enter, and that will be 777, okay? And so I'll go ahead and put those in. And the last thing I want to do is set this up so that when I navigate, when I click Simulate Navigate, I go to a particular page, and what I want to do is go to the new dashboard when I'm done. So that's kind of enough to get started. Let me go ahead and save that and look at my pages again. So we see kind of everything here. Here's the introduction again. We've got, you know, kind of all these pages set up and ready to go. And so I can now test the simulation, but before I do, what I want to do is create an account for people to gain access to the simulation. And the way that we do that is we can create different subscriptions for different organizations who want to have access to the sim, and this is done through groups here. So what I'm going to do here is click on Add a Group, and I'm going to call this my new group. It's a bad name, but that's okay. And you can see here, there's a start date for the group and expiration. This means that this group will not be able to access the simulation after the expiration date. Right now, it's set for 6 months from now. But you could also set it for 3 days from now or a week from now. You could say, okay, I'm going to give you access for a week to test it out, and then after that, you need to get a subscription for it or what have you. I can also set a maximum number of end users and also the maximum number of times the simulation can be run. I'm going to leave those other defaults in here for now. And then what I need to do is add end users to the account. And there's multiple ways of adding end users. For today, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how those all get added, but you can upload multiple end users. You can also allow end users to self-register. That's actually what the CDC is using. What I'm going to do here is just create an account. Let's see, what do I want to do? I'll do Tesla example, Tesla user. Let's do that, user 1. So that's going to be, did I spell that right? Yeah, Tesla user 1. I'm going to add them individually. This is sort of the simplest way to do it, but also it's not practical if you have a lot of them to do here. Let me put in a password for these. And then we could also have a facilitator. That's someone who manages all these simulations together. In this case, I don't need that. I'm just going to use a single account. So I'm going to create my user here. Okay, so now I've got my new user created, and I can try out the sim. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to click over here on the right, click on Run Project, and I'm going to open this in an incognito window. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to clear everything out. I want to make sure that none of the sort of data that I've been messing with is in here, and an incognito window is a good way to do that. So when I run the simulation, I usually run it in an incognito window. So here I'm opening it up, and it's asking me to log in, and the login I used was Tesla user 1. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and it's letting me log into the simulation. And here we can see the introduction that we created, and we have this video available.
Welcome to the Cybertruck unveil.
There we go. All right, good for Elon Musk there. We've got their baseline scenario, which we have results that are coming up. We have decisions that we can make. Okay, so here's the interesting part, right? I want to say, what happens if my market effectiveness is low? Let's drag it down to 90%. And now what I'm going to do is call this low marketing effectiveness. Let's do low marketing. I'll go ahead and click that and save it. And we create our new run. So what was the outcome, the new green line of the run here if we have low marketing effectiveness? And I can go back to decisions, and I can say, you know, it remembers from last time what I did, so it's set to 90% still. I'm going to say, well, what if it stays here at 100%, but we introduce a new competitor in 2023? So this is going to be a new competitor. This is my second scenario that I'm running. And there's my new competitor scenario as a new line. So far, we're always doing worse than the baseline, and I don't want it to be always negative here. So let's do something where we have better results. So let's dial this up a little bit. We'll say marketing effectiveness of 2020. We'll say the years to repurchase are a little bit shorter, which means that people will buy more frequently, and there's never a new competitor. So this is my optimist scenario, something like that. All right, so I'll go ahead and save that and run that out. And there you can see the purple line here is sort of the most optimistic scenario in terms of the outcomes. We sort of ramp up faster and plot that over time. And now we have our run manager. We can see all the runs that we did. And if I don't like one of these, I can click on it and then delete the checked run. It's going to ask me if I really want to. And and I can do so. And now if I go back to my dashboard, I can see, I can't remember which one it was now, but one of the, oh, the bad marketing one is the one I deleted. Okay, so that one's been removed from my set here, and it's available. And I can also do other things here. I have this ability on these charts. You sort of got available to download charts and things like that. So it gives a little bit of idea how this works. And what's nice about this is that this will, because this data is tied to an account, if I go away and I come back later on, what was it called? Tesla user? Is that what I said? Tesla user 1? Yeah, I think that's right. If when I log in later, if I go away and 3 days later I come back in, kind of as you would expect, it will remember the last runs that I did, so they don't disappear for every run. And that's sort of the nice thing about having these authenticated accounts where they're tied to users from it. Okay, one last thing I want to add before we wrap up, and I want to just show you one other type of report that you can build. There are a wider range of reports that are available in here. What I want to do is add, and like you can see here, there's quite a range of things that are here, but what I want to do is add a single run and just show the contrast of what a run analysis or single run looks like. Here we were doing multi-run, and what that does is create a graph where you have different lines that show different scenarios, right? And it's interesting to think about too, like, in our Excel model a moment ago, we only have one run, right? But what's happening is each of those runs is kind of contained within Epicenter, and you're able to, by changing these values, it creates these different runs, and then you're able to compare them to each other. So it's really extending the Excel model in an interesting way, right? But here, what I want to do is create an analysis page. I'm going to do a run analysis where I compare a single run, and I'm going to call this, let's see, I'm going to do this customers. I'm going to create a customers one. Oh, I didn't choose. I have to choose. I didn't do a good job there. I have to choose which one I want to do. So I'm going to call this customers. I need to choose a type of analysis that I did. Okay, there we go. All right, so there's my customers report. And then what I want to do is add another one, which is going to be my same thing, a run analysis single run. I'm going to call this my sales report. Okay, I'm going to do this fairly quickly here. So let me go back here to customers. And for this one, what I want to do is a line chart. And what this allows you to do, this type of report where you look at a single run at a time, is have multiple lines on the chart. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. But here I want to say like installed base versus potential customers, for example. And then I can put different variables on here. I can put potential customers, and I want to add another one, which is installed base. There it is. And so I've got those two on there now, and then I'm going to put another option in, which is enable legend, so I can see the legend. So there's a little legend down there. So that's one of them. And then for the other one, sales, I'm going to do new sales and repeat sales. So I'll do that here, line chart. I'll say new versus repeat sales. And we'll do new sales here, and then we'll add a new variable, which will also be repeat sales. And then we want to add the other option of putting the legend on. Okay, there we go. So there's our legend, and there's our new versus repeat sales over time. So now I have these pages, but notice these two pages aren't connected to my interface. And so I might want to create sort of reports that make these available, and I can do that through navigation. What I'm going to do now, because I have a couple of them, I'm going to add a drop-down menu, and I'll call this my reports drop-down, or my reports. And then what I want to do is add a navigation item. So this is going to be my customers navigation item, and I'm going to use my customers report for that. And I want to add another one, which is sales, and that's going to take my sales report here. Okay, so there I have the new navigation here, and if I go back to the top, I can see that. Oh, I put it at the end. I don't like it at the end, actually. I want to put it up a little bit. Let's see here. So there we go. I think it's a better placement for it. If I look at it now, you can see this here, and if I click on this, you can see now these are available, and it goes to these other pages that we have here. So that's kind of how that works. And I'll go ahead and save that, and just kind of as a final bit for today, I know we leave 5 minutes here for the end for questions. You can kind of see the final run here. Let's see here. I'm going to click on Run Project, open an incognito window. There we are. And let's see, my naming was Tesla user, is that right? Tesla user 1. have to remember the password. Hopefully I got it right. I did not. Let me try again. There we go. Okay. So now I'm in, and now you can see the new report that's available, and I can compare it. And here's the run with the baseline. Here's what it looks like with the new competitor, and here's what it looks like with the optimist scenario. It's slightly different there. And this sort of illustrates, and I can also do that, by the way, with the sales one, right? So here you can see the sales report for these different versions, kind of depending on, what's going on here. But what's interesting about this sort of shows the two differences. So this one is called, where you look at a single run, it's a run analysis. And this one is able to have more than one line on a graph, right? But you have to select between or among the different scenarios that we have run. For the other one, we did a multi-run view, and this can show multiple runs at once, and you can select and deselect them if you want to here. But because, you can see if we had more than one variable on here, it would get quite confusing, right? It would be like, well, is this total sales or is this repeat sales? I can't tell. So that's why we do it this way. So here we're able to create this legend at the bottom, and we kind of move around among the different scenarios. And here what we do is compare a single scenario at a time. All right, just a couple things to remember when you're building these kinds of simulations is that you should name, especially if you're using Excel, I mean, there's other techniques for these other languages like I mentioned, but you should name your ranges in your Excel spreadsheet to reference them easily in your interface. And I showed you a little bit about how to do that. And you should include both a time range and a step cell in your spreadsheet so that the simulation will advance over time. And to show you that here again, this is the time range we created, and that way it knows that it's something that's going to change over time, and we can set this up to whatever we want, but it needs to have a time range in it. And you also need to add this. This is a step function, and what this does is it tells it how many steps to advance at the beginning of the simulation. For games, often you want to have some history when you start the game, and so you would set this higher. For scenario planning simulations, I can't think of well, there probably are some, but it's hard to think of examples where you'd want to have it step out, into the future for the starting point. This one's starting in 2020, so we want the step to usually be 0 in scenario planning sense. All right, there's some resources that are available online. There's, if you want to do more of this, you can use our support forum, which is very active for building these things. You can also use an online reference guide, and there are webinars available. In fact, we're going to upload this webinar later today, so I'll have that available as a resource. All right, we're at the Q&A, and Raymond, what's going to happen here is Raymond will just ask me a question. I'll repeat it since Raymond's not on the mic, and then I'll respond to it, hopefully. Raymond, are there any questions?
So we have 2 questions.
Yeah.
How much does it cost to subscribe to Forio Epicenter?
So the first question is, how much does it cost to subscribe to the platform? And let me get out of this. You can find that on our website. If you go to forio.com, and then you go to products over here, you can see Epicenter as the top product that we have, and you click on that, and at the bottom of the screen, you can see pricing. And if you click on pricing, it'll give you a breakdown of the different pricing levels and things like that. And the difference in pricing, there's really 2 key things with it. This is the number of end users you can have. So if you have only 40 end users, you could use this much per year. If you have 250, and so forth. So that kind of gives an idea of it. The other part is the number of authenticated projects, or the number of projects that need users to log in, or that would have users logging in would be here. So these are the actual users that are logging in, and this is the number of projects that can support them. So those are the 2. Any other questions, Raymond?
What other kinds of simulations, aside from simulation planning scenarios, create?
Okay, so the question is, what other kinds of sims can you create besides the scenario planning simulation that we created today? And you can create turn-based, there's many kinds, first off. I should answer, there's many, like, I don't know, a dozen or more different styles of sims that created, and other things as well that aren't sims. But the big categories that we see created frequently are turn-based simulations, which would mean it's more of a game, where what you do is you make a decision, and then you submit, and then a result will appear, and then you make new decisions based on that result. And that's more of a training simulation or a game-based simulation. And then a second type that's also related to that is multiplayer, where you have teams of people who will compete, for example, for market share, or collaborate for climbing Mount Everest. That's a popular one we have, something like that. So that's another style. There are many other styles too that are available, but those are probably the three most basic styles. Again, the scenario planning style that we're covering today, uh, uh, yeah, interface, excuse me, a single player turn-based simulation and a multiplayer simulation. We have seen some people, I think there's someone on the call today actually who's done hybrid versions too, who's done kind of a combination of multiplayer with scenario planning. So that's kind of cool, where different people have access to different scenario inputs and they submit them, and then together they see a result. So there's other things you can do as well. We're at the top of the hour for this today, so thanks very much for your time. And we're going to be uploading this webinar later on today if you want to share any of this with your colleagues, and we'll be sending out information about it as well. Thanks again. Have a great day. Bye-bye, everyone.